Making a movie means taking risks, even when it's a family-friendly project like Lilo and Stitch. The story of friendship between a little girl and a wild alien is now a Disney and pop culture icon. But bringing it to life required a secret effort inside Disney's offices, far from the eyes of executives. And it almost cost a group of animators their careers. Nobody would imagine the madness behind the scenes at Disney. The story behind Lilo and Stitch begins with Chris Sanders. Growing up in Colorado, Sanders fell in love with cartoons. They helped him cope with loneliness. Ward Kimball's shorts on the wonderful world of Disney inspired him to start drawing his own characters. As he got older, he studied at the prestigious California Institute of the Arts, the same school that launched the careers of talents like Tim Burton and John Lasseter. Sanders began his professional career at Marvel Comics. Even though he was working with major brands, he dreamed of creating his own stories. He already had something in mind, a monster, but one with a good heart. In 1985, he started writing a children's book about an orphaned creature of unknown origin who hides in a North American forest and learns to communicate with the animals. The young artist wanted to explore themes like loneliness and the search for belonging. Sanders spent months developing the main character. He experimented with different features, textures, and colors until he found the perfect mix: blue body, pointy ears, expressive eyes, and mouth. Sanders' life and career changed in 1987 when he joined the Walt Disney Company. He started in the visual development department and soon contributed to films from Disney's second golden age, like Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. His first major break came with Mulan, where he made key contributions to the story and earned credit as a head of story. It was only a matter of time before he was promoted to director. But Disney was entering a period of uncertainty. By the mid-1990s, the resignation of Jeffrey Katzenberg, the president of Walt Disney Animation Studios, marked the end of the company's golden era. Upcoming animated films like Hercules didn't perform as well as expected. This led to delays in other projects, or even outright cancellations. Nobody in charge seemed to know how to move forward. In 1997, Disney's CEO, Michael Eisner, decided to take a chance on a small, modestly budgeted film. In fact, he wanted something more auteur-driven, where the animators had more creative control than usual. Since 101 Dalmatians by Bill Peet, no animated Disney film had been written, designed, and directed by the same person. Eisner and his team were looking for the Dumbo of a new generation. That message was picked up by creative executive Thomas Schumacher. He had loved Sanders' work on Mulan and other films, and knew he might be the visionary Disney needed. He asked Sanders if he had any ideas that could be turned into a full-length feature. Sanders remembered his monster in the forest concept, and he combined it with something he'd been thinking about. In most Disney films, the villains are usually punished by death. But what if, instead of dying, a villain was given the chance to change and be redeemed? That's how the creature would become good. Schumacher liked the creature, but not much else. A forest filled with animals was already strange, and it wouldn't contrast enough with the alien protagonist. He suggested placing the creature in a human environment instead. He also thought that a forest meant too much green on screen. Schumacher recommended setting the story somewhere like Tahiti, where his great-grandmother was born. Sanders appreciated the feedback, but wasn't sold on Tahiti. The solution was hanging right there in his office, a map of Hawaii, where he had vacationed. He was fascinated by its geography, its people, and its colors. Choosing Hawaii as the main setting helped Sanders shape both the story and the characters. With the project taking shape, Sanders named it Lilo and Stitch. Schumacher was blown away. He told Sanders they'd move forward with the film on one condition: it had to look exactly like his original drawings.
I wanted us to make a movie that looked like a Chris Sanders drawing.
Sanders was officially named director of the project, but he wouldn't be doing it alone. Dean Deblois would join him. Originally from Canada, Deblois had started at Disney as a storyboard artist. He and Sanders had already worked together on Mulan, and they really enjoyed collaborating. Deblois liked the concept behind Lilo and Stitch, but he felt the story was a little weak. Together, they wrote the script, ready to take on the biggest challenge of their careers. Disney set the film's budget at $80 million, a relatively modest number compared to the big-budget animated productions of the time. The first step to cutting costs was relocating the animators to Florida. Instead of working in Los Angeles, Sanders, Deblois, and their team would be based in Disney's Orlando studio. Being far from the company's main headquarters gave them a big advantage. They could fly under the radar, avoiding the constant oversight of top executives, especially Michael Eisner, who was known for being demanding and controlling.
Oh my God, that's Michael Eisner. Here you go, Mr. Eisner. It's been Brianized. You might
See you at Disneyland. Bring money.
This turned out to be one of the most crucial decisions that made the film possible. The visual development was strong, but Sanders knew the studio might reject it. So, they moved forward with production quietly, without telling anyone, until the film had taken enough shape to speak for itself. What Sanders didn't expect was that this secret production approach would continue through almost the entire process. Once the budget was approved, the development and research team, including the directors, traveled to Hawaii. As mentioned before, no one outside the core team knew about this.
Who's going to Hawaii? Am I going to Hawaii?
Stop saying Hawaiian.
Lilo and Stitch was a low-priority project, and Schumacher kept executives in LA updated with only vague, generic progress reports.
Thomas Schumacher, who was the head of feature animation, and he deserves more credit than anybody else. That film exists literally only because of him.
For Sanders, immersing himself in the environment, the people, and the culture of Hawaii was essential to accurately reflect them in the movie. He also wanted to capture the unique colors and textures of the islands. So, he instructed the artists not to take reference photos. Instead, each had to explore the island with canvases, easels, and paintbrushes, and capture real places and objects using real colors. While in Hawaii, the team also found inspiration that helped them further shape the characters. Once the research trip was done, they returned to the US to begin casting voice actors. They didn't limit their search to Hawaiian actors, but they knew local talent could bring something special to the film. That's how they reconnected with Tia Carrere. They had met her years earlier during the casting for Mulan, and remembered her for both her talent and her Hawaiian heritage. She landed the role of Nani, and she suggested something that made a huge impact, incorporating Pidgin, the Creole English dialect spoken by the many ethnic groups in Hawaii. She also recommended Jason Scott Lee, who ended up voicing David. Finding the right voice for Lilo was more challenging. They first looked for Hawaiian girls because they wanted an authentic voice from the islands. But when they couldn't find anyone who quite fit, they held auditions in the mainland US. That's when Dave Chase came in. She had already done some TV acting, and the moment she read her lines, Sanders and Deblois were blown away. She conveyed both vulnerability and inner turmoil. Then, suddenly, joy and excitement. Now, the only voice left to cast was Stitch's. The original plan was for Stitch to communicate only through sounds, but Sanders realized the character would need to speak a few words as he learned English throughout the movie. Disney suggested casting a celebrity, but the directors pushed back. First, a star might feel awkward making so many strange noises. Second, it would drive up the budget. Sanders had already recorded some temp tracks with his own voice to accompany the animation and give future actors a guide. But that rough mix of grunts and short phrases actually impressed Deblois, so much so that they decided to use Sanders' own voice for Stitch in the final cut. With all the research gathered, the directors and their small team locked themselves in the Florida studio. Sanders compared the atmosphere to Disney in the 1940s, where young, talented, and passionate creatives simply wanted to make the best movies possible, untouched by Hollywood's bad habits. For everyone involved, it was a warm and joyful experience, though not without its challenges. When it came time to create the backgrounds, they had to bring back the watercolor technique. It had been common in early Disney productions, but had since fallen out of use due to how complex and delicate it was. They quickly learned why. Most modern animators didn't know how to work with watercolors and had to learn the process from scratch. There wasn't much outside help either. Sanders managed to get some guidance from Maurice Noble, a veteran animator who had worked at Disney back in the 40s. Even though the team was spared from executive interference, the directors still had to attend meetings at Disney headquarters in California. That's where Schumacher worked his magic, dodging Eisner's questions whenever the CEO scanned the meeting agenda and asked about the film. Since most of Disney's attention was focused on the booming trend of 3D animation, nobody seemed interested in this small, traditionally animated 2D project. As a result, Lilo and Stitch went unsupervised for 2 full years of production. Working in secret gave the team creative freedom, but it also came with some setbacks. Because of the ultra-tight budget, neither director wanted to ask for more money and risk drawing attention to the project. That meant they had to skip or simplify certain shadowing, texture work, or minor details, saving those efforts for the most important scenes. But nothing could have prepared them for what happened just weeks before the film was set to wrap. By mid-2001, Sanders and Deblois had almost finished the movie. Everything looked promising, and they were preparing for their first screening with the company. Then came the September 11th attacks. Sanders was devastated, not just by the tragedy itself, but by what it meant for the movie. In the film's original ending, Stitch hijacks a Boeing 747 to chase down Captain Gantu, who has kidnapped Lilo. The plane flies over downtown Honolulu before crashing into a cluster of buildings. Sanders knew they couldn't keep that scene, but there were only a few weeks left before the deadline. So he came up with a last-minute solution. Instead of the commercial airliner, Stitch would steal Jumba's spaceship. And instead of buildings, the aircraft would weave between mountain canyons. They managed to rework the entire sequence without disrupting the film's pacing. But to stay on budget, they had to cut some corners. One of those compromises was designing the spaceship to look very similar to the 747, complete with turbine-like engines, so they could reuse parts of the animation. Once Lilo and Stitch was finished, Sanders and Deblois faced their biggest test yet, showing the movie, developed in near-total secrecy, to Michael Eisner in a private screening. It was the first time the CEO had seen the final product, and he'd had no oversight throughout production. The directors were nervous. Everything they'd built could fall apart in a single moment. After the screening, Eisner asked to speak with Sanders alone. They sat down in an office, just the two of them. Eisner said, "I like the film. It's different and weird, but in a good way." Sanders and Deblois were both relieved and thrilled. But the final verdict would come from the audience. While the team was busy making their passion project, the animation industry had changed. CG animated films had taken over the market, and hand-drawn animation was starting to feel like a thing of the past. The marketing team didn't know how to sell the film. Someone even suggested using CGI for a commercial, but Schumacher shut it down. He knew the watercolor style was part of the film's identity. Sanders understood that Stitch had to be the heart of the marketing campaign. So he came up with an unusual idea. Stitch would invade other Disney classics. They created 4 parody trailers where Stitch disrupts iconic scenes from Disney's second golden age. The efforts of Sanders, Deblois, Schumacher, and the rest of the team paid off. Lilo and Stitch hit theaters on June 21st, 2002, and it was a hit. Kids were captivated by the characters, the story, and the stunning visuals. It grossed $271 million worldwide. Critics praised its creativity and freshness. And the success extended to Hawaii, where the local community celebrated how the film captured the spirit of the islands. Lilo and Stitch became the start of a phenomenon. Video games, merch, 3 movies, 3 animated series, and an upcoming live-action film. It all began as a small, heartfelt project, driven by a team that valued storytelling over corporate formulas. And it proved that even inside a media giant like Disney, there's still room for personal stories and genuine emotions. Just like the bond between these 2 unforgettable characters. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and until next time.